So the Civil War ends. 4 million enslaved people are now free. But what does that word, freedom, actually mean? Is it just, not being in chains anymore? The right to move around? Or is it something more, something tangible? Today, we're diving into what happened right after that promise of freedom was made and how it was almost immediately shattered.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at that incredible promise of freedom that felt so real right after the war. Then, we'll see how that dream was just dashed. But this isn't just a story about loss. Oh no. We're going to explore the amazing ways people started rebuilding their own worlds through family, education, and the rise of the Black church. And finally, we'll connect all of that to the unfinished legacy of this whole era.
You see, for most of the 4 million newly freed people, freedom wasn't some abstract concept. Nope, it was deeply, fundamentally tied to a very real hope: owning your own piece of land, a place to build a life on your own terms.
I mean, really try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. After centuries of bondage where your work, your family, your own body belong to someone else, what does it mean to finally be free? For millions, the answer was simple and concrete: economic independence, the chance to work for yourself, on your own land, and to build a real future for your kids. And get this wasn't just some pipe dream. For a brief, shining moment, it was actual government policy. General Sherman's Special Field Order Number 15 set aside huge areas of coastal land just for freed families. This is the origin of that famous phrase, 40 acres and a mule. It created this powerful, very real expectation that the government itself was going to provide the foundation for a new life. But just when it seemed like this new future was right there for the taking, the rug was pulled out from under them. The federal government's policy took a shocking, devastating turn. Historians call it the Great Reversal, and honestly, that's putting it mildly. The message they got was blunt, it was brutal, and it was often delivered by the Freedmen's Bureau, the very agency that was supposed to be helping them. The promise of land? Revoked. Instead, they were told to sign labor contracts and go right back to work for the same people who had just enslaved them. Just like that, the dream was over. Can you just imagine the shock, the betrayal? In response, a local Black commission on Edisto Island, South Carolina, gave this incredibly powerful statement to the Union General who brought the news. It's so raw. It perfectly captures the injustice of it all, being told to just forgive your tormentors and go back to being powerless. And this reversal happened so fast, it would make your head spin. Look at this timeline. Early 1865, you have a promise of land. By 1866, President Andrew Johnson is already giving those lands back to their former Confederate owners. By the late 1860s, any real shot at land reform was completely dead in Congress. The door had been slammed shut. So what do? The government's promise is broken? Well, this is where the story pivots. If freedom couldn't be built on land granted from the outside, it was going to have to be forged from within. African Americans started to define and build freedom on their own terms. One of the very first things people did was to try and put their families back together. Under slavery, families were systematically torn apart. In freedom, people walked hundreds of miles. They placed newspaper ads for decades looking for lost children, parents, spouses. They rushed to have formal wedding ceremonies to finally make those bonds legal. This wasn't just about finding family, it was a profound act of taking back control. Right alongside rebuilding the family was this deep, powerful thirst for education. For generations, it was illegal for them to learn to read. So now, the ability to read, especially the Bible, was seen as a fundamental part of being free. Booker T. Washington put it perfectly here. It was like an entire people trying to go to school at once. And we're not just talking about kids. It was totally normal to find a 3-year-old and an 80-year-old learning their ABCs side by side in the same crowded one-room schoolhouse. Just picture that for a second. After a whole day of backbreaking labor, adults would flock to night schools, absolutely determined to get the knowledge that had been denied to them. So as families were being rebuilt and people were flocking to schools, one institution rose above all others. It became the bedrock of the community, the absolute center of this new world they were forging, the independent Black church. And the change was just explosive. Before emancipation, most Black Southerners had to worship under the eye of white ministers. Afterwards, they left those churches in droves to start their own. The scale here is just staggering. By the 1930s, almost 40% of all Black churches in America could trace their roots right back to the short post-emancipation period. It was a total remaking of the community's spiritual and social life. But the church was so much more than just a place you went on Sundays. Not even close. It was often the biggest building in town, so it was the schoolhouse, the community center. It was where political movements got organized and where new leaders were trained. It was the one safe space where the community could define its own culture and its own values. And these churches weren't perfect, static places either. They were full of internal debate. Women were the absolute backbone of these institutions, and leaders like Nannie Helen Burroughs fought on two fronts at once, protecting Black women from violence out in the world while also demanding equal access to leadership roles inside the church itself. So, what does this all add up to? When you step back and look at this incredible journey, from a promise that was shattered to a community that rebuilt itself from the ground up, you start to see the foundations of a legacy that is still very, very much with us today. So let's just recap this powerful sequence of events. The first hope was external, land from the government. When that promise was broken, it forced this incredible pivot inward. Freedom had to be redefined from scratch, built on the internal foundations of family and education, and anchored by the powerful new institution of the independent Black church. And that leaves us with a final thought. The pillars that were forged in the fire of this era, strong families, a passion for education, and powerful community institutions, they proved to be unbelievably resilient. So the real question for us today is this: how do those foundations, built out of a broken promise over 150 years ago, continue to shape our society, our politics, and our communities right now?